Cold fingers of the dawn creep under 10,000 blankets. TV's unblinking eye stares at 1,000 empty lounges. Boxes of smoked herring stand by the gas stoves and wonder, am I my brother's kipper? Dawn in the Isle of Man, as the tourist never sees it. Dawn in the Irish Sea Island that has its own government, the finest kippers in the world, and a law still enforceable that says Scotsmen can be shot on sight. An island whose economy is based on tourists and doesn't mind admitting it, with towns composed of nothing but hotels and boarding houses. Hotels with every room overlooking the sea, to furnished apartments with the tenants overlooking the rent. Many hoteliers advertise own farm produce, and for years those Manxmen who didn't become engineers or fishermen were farmers. There's a perennial shortage of labor in the tourist season, but the mild climate and rich soil partly counteract this. Not that the farmers don't grumble. Ever since the Manx potato riots, they've been wildly suspicious of tax collectors. Even here, where income tax barely exists, and where surtax is just a dirty word from across the water. The British are a seafaring nation. This is obvious to anyone traveling to Douglas by boat. Most of the passengers are trying to get a better look at the sea by hanging over the rails. And this in spite of a post-war fleet of ships, since the German and British admiralties between them blew up most of the Manx vessels during the war. The Manx people have always been close to the sea. Captain Bligh was married here, and Fletcher Christian was descended from Manxmen, who can handle a tiller better than a steering wheel, even though the fishing fleet, once made up of over 600 boats, is now reduced to half a dozen. Most of their catch is tourists wanting a trip to the lighthouse, but a few still chug out every day in their search for the elusive herring. The wooded valleys of the southern part of the island have sheltered lovers, given a living to poachers, and have been the source of scaffolds, gibbets, and stakes for the burning of witches. A slightly more genteel age has now put the woods into forestry department hands, which is empowered with the preservation of the trees. They also make a bit on the side with garden ornaments, but are fighting a losing battle as far as the lovers and poachers are concerned. The island's equable climate is rare in the British Isles, and Douglas monotonously holds the sunshine record for northern UK. To let vacationers have the full benefit of such weather, the island has laid down transport to every beauty spot so that even those English people crippled with chilblains can still see everything. Not that the Isle of Man is particularly hilly, but it has got rather more valleys than other places. A few of the hills require more than soundness and wind and boot, and ropes are only necessary for getting off the tram. A large sign used to hang on Bradda Head as a warning of the 200-foot drop, but as nobody fell over, they took it down again. Although they should have known better, it was to Bradda Head that two youthful holiday makers went last year for a little illicit bird egg collecting. One of the strange things about young males is they turn up their noses at hard-boiled eggs and yet will risk their necks for a quite useless shell. It's strange how no one wants to know you when you're in trouble. There were Charlie and Percy doing their hanging act on the side of a cliff, and 10,000 holidaymakers laid back in the sun and ignored them, blissfully inhaling the smell of rotting seaweed under the impression that it was ozone. But then vacationers are a notoriously susceptible bunch. They buy spades that won't dig and fill buckets that won't hold water. They lie in the sun and get burned, or they take oily precautions that just make the sand stick better. They ruin their hair with salt, fill their shoes with sand, their lungs with spray, and their stomachs with water, and then go home boasting that they have had a wonderful time. The funny thing is that most of them have. "50,000 visitors a week share one thing with the Manxmen. They both have a close affiliation to water. The islander prefers to stay on top of it, and the visitor immerses himself in it. For not only Britain, but every Britisher is an island, and is never happier than when entirely surrounded by water." Fortunately, there's enough water in the Irish Sea for every visitor to indulge, though exactly what enjoyment there is in sitting on a cold, wet plank surrounded by cold, wet water is a mystery that must remain the secret of the dedicated yachtsman. Perhaps it's because it's so nice when you stop. "20 years ago, an aeroplane was something you rushed out to look at in the Isle of Man. Today, half a dozen airlines run services to the island, and the roar of the aircraft has become as familiar as the roar of the breakers. 200 square miles of the island rarely see a vacationer. Its most outstanding characteristic is that lonely, almost desolate scenery lies within a mile of any resort. Yet organized entertainment is available everywhere for those that need it. 7 golf courses have weekly competitions, and devotees of any sport from bowling to gardening can find something to interest them in the daily events. There's motorcycling open to world entrants, sheepdog trials open to sheepdogs, archery for Robin Hoods, and bathing beauty contests for tired businessmen. Yet a mile away from the organized entertainment, you can hang on the side of a cliff all day without anyone spotting you and calling the police. There were no Manx civil police until after 1765, when their main duty seems to have been the catching of people profaning the Sabbath by digging potatoes or making a beehive on Sunday. But doubtless they exceeded their duties as much as their contemporaries. The Manx Cliff rescue teams are all volunteers, and though their equipment comes from official funds, the funds turn a deaf ear to the screams of torn trousers. Ever since the first ancient Briton invented the xylophone by thumping on a dinosaur's backbone, the British have been suckers for music. Every British resort and park has its bandstand. But in the Isle of Man, they go one better. No bandstands. They all sit. The Manxmen used to try suspected witches by rolling them down a hillside in a spiked barrel. But they swear that it's no reflection on visitors that they so much enjoy this spiked-barreled rolling effect of the modern fun fair. And any vacationer with a strong enough stomach can indulge in the joys of the contemporary entertainment business. Up and down the little car like a crazy shooting star. Do you wonder where you are? Feels like last night in the bar. Because of the unpaid status of the rescue teams, assistance on the Manx cliffs is doubly difficult. The height of the cliffs, coupled with the notorious weakness of the slate rocks, is bad enough. Add to this the ever-present fear of your wife's wrath if you do tear your trousers, and it will be seen that the Manx police have an unenviable task. Fortunately, the police are human, and though there was plainly a case for it, they refused to pinch the boys for illegal parking. And so, to the joy of the Wild Bird's Egg Preservation Society, Charlie and Percy were returned to their parents for a well-warranted belting for missing lunch. And the police returned to their more mundane duties, like looking for people building beehives on Sunday. The fishing boats return, and people gather on Port Erin's promenade to witness one of the Isle of Man's specialties, the sunsets, explained away by the scientists as being caused by the dust of Belfast. 20,000 vacationers rush back to their hotels for high tea. The locals gather in their locals, and the shutters of night come down. "30,000 people will soon be accommodated in dance halls, theaters, and cinemas. A few hundred more will be nursing their sunburn in bed. Restaurant kitchens are bursting with food richer than the customers, and people are wandering into the old pubs with broad beams on the ceiling and on the barmaids. Night has fallen on the Isle of Man, and 3,000 worn-out hotel cooks can relax and think that the best thing about the future is that it only comes one day at a time."